It's easy to feel a bit overwhelmed these days, isn't it? You open any news app and it's just wall-to-wall headlines about climate change. There's this real sense of urgency, and honestly, sometimes it feels like the problem is just, well, too big, too complex. But what if I told you that actually, amidst all that, there are some truly surprising innovations bubbling up around the world? Ideas that aren't just theories, but are actually being put into practice right now. So that's our mission for this deep dive. We want to cut through some of that noise and explore some of the most fascinating and potentially really impactful climate change innovations happening globally. We've pulled insights from quite a few sources. There's a New York Post piece on 7 climate change innovations, an article from PDK's called 7 New Inventions That Could Fight the Effects of Climate Change, and also a detailed look into decarbonization by Everllence. Okay, let's unpack this. There's a lot to dig into that might just give you a new sense of possibility. Let's start with something visual, something that's probably, well, all too familiar. Our oceans. The stark reality, looking at our sources, is they are just filling up with plastic. It's incredible. One study actually predicts the amount of plastic in the oceans will triple by 2040.
Triple? Yeah.
And it concentrates in these areas, right? Like the Great Pacific Garbage Patch.
Yeah.
Which is, this is mind-boggling, twice the size of Texas.
It's a staggering problem, absolutely. But there are dedicated efforts starting to tackle what's already out there. Take the Ocean Cleanup Project, for instance. They've deployed this device, nicknamed Jenny.
Jenny?
Yeah. It's basically this half-mile-long U-shaped floating barrier. It's designed just to scoop up debris as it drifts. And since they put it out in July, it's already pulled in something like 64,000 pounds of trash just from the Pacific.
Wow. 64,000 pounds.
And their goal is ambitious, no doubt. They want to remove 90% of floating plastic by 2040. And what's really interesting, I think, is what they do with it afterwards. They're not just collecting it. The captured plastic gets recycled into products like sunglasses.
Sunglasses, really?
Yeah, which then helps fund the ongoing effort. It kind of closes the loop, challenges that whole idea of waste.
Okay, so we're pulling plastic out, which is great. But what if we could, stop it before it even gets that far out? I heard the Netherlands has come up with something remarkably simple sounding, the Great Bubble Barrier. How does that even work? Could that actually prevent these huge garbage patches from forming?
Well, yes, potentially for stuff entering from rivers. This innovation, it's from a startup in the Netherlands. Imagine this. A tube laid on the bottom of a waterway, like a canal or a river mouth.
Okay.
It pumps out air, creating a screen of bubbles, a bubble curtain, but it's angled diagonally. So the natural flow of the water, combined with the bubbles, pushes floating stuff like plastic to the surface and towards a collection area on the side.
Oh, just bubbles.
Just bubbles. And it's surprisingly effective. In Amsterdam's canals, it removed about 86% of the debris.
86%?
Yeah. And crucially, it seems to have very little impact on fish or, boat traffic.
That's clever. Really clever.
It's a great example, I think, of a localized intervention making a potentially big difference downstream.
Okay, so innovative ways to clean water. What about land? We often look for these high-tech fixes, but sometimes, like you said, nature has the best answers, like just trees,
Yes.
right, for soaking up carbon.
Exactly. Trees are amazing carbon sinks. And that's where companies like Flash Forest come in. They're a Canadian startup. What they're doing is using drones for reforestation.
Drones planting trees.
Yep. And the comparison is pretty stark. These drones, they can plant something like 100,000 trees in a single day.
100,000.
Compare that to a human planter who might manage maybe 1,500 trees a day.
Right. Big difference.
Huge difference. And they do it cheaply, too, around 50 cents per tree. So it's a direct way to fight deforestation, especially after things like wildfires. But maybe the real game changer isn't just the speed, It's getting into those remote, hard-to-reach areas quickly that accelerates natural regeneration where it's really needed.
Okay, cleaning up plastic, planting trees. Let's shift focus a bit. What about the CO2 that's already in the atmosphere? I saw something surprising mentioned in the sources. Coldplay is involved in this.
That's right. The band Coldplay, yeah. They've actually partnered with a company called Climeworks. They're a Swiss company, and they're behind the Orca carbon capture and storage plant. It's in Iceland.
Carbon capture, how does that work? Like vacuuming the sky?
Sort of. They use these giant fans to pull in huge amounts of air. Then the air passes through special filters that chemically bind with the CO2, capturing it.
Okay, then what?
Once it's captured, they heat it up, release the CO2, and then they mix it with water and pump it deep underground into basaltic rock formations. And over time, it reacts with the rock and basically Turns into stone. Mineralizes.
It turns into stone, permanently stored.
That's the idea. Permanent removal. The Orca plant on its own removes about 4,000 tons of CO2 per year.
4,000 tons. How much is that in the grand scheme?
It's a start, and the captured CO2 before storing could potentially be used for other things too, like helping plants grow in greenhouses or even putting the fizz in soda.
Right. I saw that quote from Gernot Wagner, the climate economist. He said, what they do is they commercialize the process that literally takes CO2 out of thin air. That's fantastic. But he also added that point about urgency, didn't he? Like it's so late in the game, it's already necessary to take CO2 out of thin air.
Exactly. It highlights the need.
It is truly fascinating tech. But you mentioned energy demands earlier for other things. Does this take a lot of power?
That is the big question. Our sources definitely flag the high energy demand for these direct air capture or DAC machines.
Right.
If the electricity powering them isn't clean, isn't renewable, well, you could end up increasing emissions overall, which sort of defeats the purpose.
That's a catch-22.
It is. And there's also the cost.
Yeah.
Scaling these things up to a level where they make a real global difference, that's going to be incredibly expensive.
So it raises that crucial question. How do we make sure the energy source for the solution doesn't add to the problem?
Precisely. It has to be integrated with the transition to renewables.
Okay, so direct air capture is one piece. What about the bigger picture for industries? You know, the ones generating so much carbon in the first place. Shipping, energy production. This brings us to that term we hear a lot, decarbonization. What does that really mean in practice?
Right. Decarbonization, at its core, is about reducing CO2 emissions and then ultimately avoiding them altogether. Mostly, that means switching from fossil fuels to renewable energy sources like wind and solar. And companies like Everllence, they used to be called Man Energy Solutions, they're really trying to pioneer this in heavy industry.
Everllence, okay.
Their mission is pretty bold. Achieve net zero emissions by 2050. That's across sectors like shipping, power generation, industrial production, big emitters, and they're aiming for a 2/3 reduction just in this decade.
2/3. That's ambitious for those sectors.
Yeah, it really is. And they've set specific targets, like getting 50% of their earnings from new business areas by 2030, having 50% of their business come from sustainable tech by then, and even cutting their own production plant emissions by 50% compared to 2018 levels. It signals a real shift.
So what kind of technologies are they using?
Well, things like direct electrification, where possible, using green hydrogen.
Hydrogen comes up a lot.
It does. It has huge potential as a future fuel, especially for things like ships or maybe power plants that need a fuel source. Also, power-to-X solutions. That's basically using renewable electricity to create other energy carriers, like synthetic fuels. Makes clean energy easier to store and transport for those harder-to-electrify sectors.
All right, like long-haul shipping or aviation fuel.
Exactly. And things like industrial-scale heat pumps, too. The benefits are pretty clear. Less greenhouse gas, better energy efficiency, relying on renewables, and frankly, it enhances their reputation, too.
Yeah, there was that powerful quote from Everllence's CEO, Dr. Iwi Labra. He said, "We have the opportunity to decarbonize industries that are crucial for the world economy. That's why we get out of bed every morning."
That sums up the drive, I think.
Okay, so we've talked big industry, global efforts. Let's zoom back in a bit. How might these innovations touch our daily lives? Maybe starting with what's on our dinner plates.
Right. This brings us to something called cultured meat. You might have heard it called lab meat, too.
Lab meat. Yeah, it sounds a bit sci-fi. How does it work?
Well, the basic idea is fascinating. Instead of raising and slaughtering an entire animal, you take a small sample of animal cells, muscle cells, and then you grow that muscle tissue directly in a lab, in a cultivator, feeding it nutrients.
So you're growing just the meat part.
Exactly, just the muscle tissue. And it's actually moving beyond sci-fi. It's already approved for sale in places like Singapore.
Really? You can buy it?
Yep, a company called Eat just sells cultured chicken bites there. And the potential environmental benefits are pretty significant. Think about traditional livestock farming.
Huge footprint, right?
Yeah.
Land use, water, emissions.
Exactly. Greenhouse gases, deforestation, water pollution. Cultured meat could drastically reduce all of that. Plus, there's an ethical argument for people concerned about animal welfare.
What's the catch? Is it expensive?
That's the main challenge right now, yes. It's still pretty costly compared to conventional meat. But the idea is, as the technology scales up, the cost will come down.
And getting regulatory approval in more places, I guess.
That's another big hurdle, absolutely. But it has the potential to really reshape agriculture.
Okay, food is one thing. Now, here's something I found really interesting. Turning your workout into actual power, like usable electricity.
Yeah, this one's pretty neat. It's called the REGEN exercise bike. It's from a UK company, Energem. It looks like a regular high-end stationary bike, but here's the cool part. It has a built-in battery pack.
Okay.
And as you pedal, you generate electricity, and that charges the battery.
So your effort isn't just wasted heat.
Exactly. Then after your workout, you can actually unclip the charged battery pack.
Unclip it.
Yeah, take it out and use it to power your devices, phones, tablets, laptops, whatever.
How much power are we talking?
Well, the company claims that a solid hour-long workout can generate enough electricity to charge an iPhone about 12 times.
12 times from one workout.
Yeah. It's maybe a small amount in the grand scheme, but it's a very direct way to see your own effort turned into usable, clean energy.
Yeah, I remember that quote from Gernot Wagner again. He had some pretty practical advice on it.
Oh, yeah.
He said something like, if you're incapable of biking outside and you have to spend a lot of money on some gadgets to make you bike, yes, spend it on this instead of the Peloton.
Uh-huh. Yeah, a bit cheeky, but makes the point.
All right, let's shift back to the broader energy landscape now. We've talked about some flashy ideas, but not all important innovations are like that, right? Some are more behind the scenes.
Definitely. And sometimes the less flashy ones are actually more impactful in the near term, like advancements in solar power. There's a company called Leap Photovoltaics, for example.
Leap Photovoltaics, what are they doing?
They've apparently developed a new method for making solar cells that could potentially cut the manufacturing cost in half.
Half.
The description sounds a bit like 3D printing. They're finding ways to convert silicon powder directly into solar cells more efficiently. And the process is claimed to be incredibly resource light. Uses maybe 1/10 of the silicon compared to traditional methods.
Wow.
70% less energy and 90% less water.
Those are huge savings.
They really are. If they can scale this up, it could make solar power significantly cheaper and more accessible. They apparently launched last year and were hoping to serve customers by 2023, so it's moving fast.
Yeah, Wagner was enthusiastic about this one, too. He said, fantastic, let's do that. Let's scale this up. They're fundamentally better than anything else you can do to produce electricity.
High praise. And it fits into this broader trend of distributed renewable energy, or DERs.
DERs.
Yeah, basically a smaller, decentralized energy sources. Think solar panels on your roof, or a business installing its own solar generation, power generation closer to where it's actually used.
Right. Reduces transmission losses, too, I suppose.
Exactly. The benefits are clear. Lower energy bills for the owner. Maybe even income if you sell excess power back to the grid. And it can make the whole grid more resilient, less dependent on single large power plants.
But are there downsides? I imagine making all those panels has an environmental cost.
That's definitely something the sources mention. The manufacturing process for solar panels and wind turbines isn't impact-free. And then there's the issue of disposal at the end of their life. And sometimes, depending on utility rate structures, integrating lots of DERs could potentially affect overall utility bills, though that's complex.
Okay, so better solar on Earth. What about taking it off-planet? This sounds like something out of a sci-fi movie. Space-based solar power.
It does sound futuristic, doesn't it? But it's a concept that's been around for a while and is getting serious looks again.
So what's the idea? Huge solar panels in orbit.
Essentially, yes. Very large solar arrays orbiting the Earth, collecting sunlight 2004/7, unaffected by weather or nighttime.
Okay, constant power collection.
Yeah.
How do you get it down here?
That's the tricky part. The energy collected would be converted into microwaves or maybe laser beams
Lasers.
and beamed down to specific receiving stations called rectennas on Earth, where it's converted back into electricity.
What's the advantage over Earth-based solar?
Consistency. It provides a constant baseline power source, which renewables on Earth sometimes struggle with. It could be useful in places where large solar or wind farms just aren't feasible.
But the costs must be astronomical, launching all that.
Absolutely. The sources highlight the immense cost of launching and maintaining these huge structures in space as a major hurdle.
And beaming microwaves or lasers down.
Right.
Any risks there?
That's another concern raised. Potential impact on wildlife, especially birds or even aircraft flying through the beam path. And the risk, however small, of accidentally misdirecting the beam.
Right, so lots of potential, but also some serious challenges and safety questions to figure out.
Exactly. It's definitely more of a long-term ambitious project needing big breakthroughs in cost and safety.
Okay, to wrap things up, let's touch on some of the really, really big picture ideas, the ones often grouped under geoengineering. These are large-scale interventions, some still very much in the research phase.
Right. We're talking about deliberate, large-scale manipulation of the Earth's systems to counteract climate change. Harvard University, for example, has been researching strategies beyond just carbon removal. Things like solar radiation management and ocean fertilization. It really speaks to the urgency, the widespread and rapid changes the climate is undergoing, that scientists are even considering these kinds of things.
Polar radiation management,
Mhm.
like literally creating a sunshade for the Earth. How would that even work?
That's the basic concept behind atmospheric sun shading or solar geoengineering. The idea is to release reflective particles or aerosols high up in the stratosphere.
Like volcanic eruptions do naturally.
Exactly like that, but intentionally. These particles would reflect a small amount of incoming sunlight back into space, creating a slate cooling effect to offset warming.
But wouldn't that have side effects? Messing with sunlight feels risky.
That's the huge concern. Our sources specifically mention one major worry: studies indicating it could significantly interfere with global precipitation patterns. Changing rainfall could have massive consequences.
Yeah, that sounds potentially catastrophic in itself.
Then there's another idea focused on the oceans: ocean fertilization.
Fertilizing the ocean,
Yeah.
like adding plant food.
Pretty much. The idea is to add nutrients, often iron, to parts of the ocean where they are scarce. This stimulates the growth of phytoplankton, tiny marine plants.
And they absorb CO2.
Right, through photosynthesis, just like land plants. The theory is that this would pull more CO2 out of the atmosphere, and when the phytoplankton die, some of that carbon sinks to the deep ocean.
But are there risks to messing with the ocean's food web like that?
Huge unknowns and potential drawbacks. There's a risk of fundamentally altering marine ecosystems, maybe triggering harmful algal blooms.
Right, like red tides.
Exactly. Plus, there are big questions about how effective it would really be on a large scale, how long the carbon would stay sequestered, and the sheer cost and logistics of doing it. It's very complex. We also saw a brief mention of something more localized: coral reef cooling.
Trying to save coral reefs.
Yeah, ideas like pumping cooler water up from the deep ocean onto shallow reefs, or maybe using artificial shading structures to protect them from heat stress and bleaching caused by warming waters and acidification.
Are these being done now?
They're mostly still in the early development and testing phases, I believe, but they offer at least some hope for trying to preserve these incredibly important ecosystems while we tackle the bigger emissions problem. But stepping back, all these large-scale geoengineering ideas, they come with really significant risks and profound ethical questions.
Like who gets to decide?
Exactly. Who decides to deploy something that could affect the entire planet? Who manages it? What happens if there are unintended consequences, like messing up regional weather patterns? How do you govern something like that internationally?
Yeah, the governance issues alone seem massive.
They are. It's a really complex area, balancing potential benefits against potentially enormous risks.
Wow. We've covered such an incredible range of innovations today, haven't we? I mean, from physically scooping plastic out of the ocean and planting trees with drones,
Mm-hmm.
all the way to growing meat in a lab, capturing carbon directly from the air, and even contemplating, shading the planet or beaming power from space.
It really does show the sheer breadth of human ingenuity being applied to this challenge. It's quite remarkable.
It really highlights the diverse efforts happening everywhere.
It does. But it's also crucial, I think, to connect this back to the bigger picture. One really critical message that came through from the sources is this: technology, while incredibly helpful and necessary, it can help slow the rate of warming, but it is absolutely not a replacement for cutting greenhouse gas emissions in the first place.
Right, it's not an either situation.
Not at all. The long-term solutions have to involve both things happening at the same time: widespread adoption of green energy, and a fundamental reduction in how much carbon we're putting out. It's a multifaceted approach. Every effort contributes.
So what does all this mean for you, listening? Hopefully, understanding these innovations gives you a better sense of the diverse efforts underway. It shows the complexity, right? It's not just one magic bullet solution waiting out there. It's more like a mosaic of different approaches, each with its own promise, its own challenges, its own timeline. It empowers you with that knowledge. So, maybe a final thought to leave you with. Considering all these incredible, sometimes strange-sounding innovations we've discussed, capturing carbon from thin air, growing meat without animals, space lasers, which one do you think represents the most radical rethinking of our relationship with the planet? And perhaps more importantly, what do you see as the biggest hurdle, technical, economic, ethical, political, to that particular innovation becoming widespread. Something to ponder. We definitely encourage you to keep exploring, keep asking questions, and continue your own deep dive into these really vital topics.